Welcome to episode 342 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent on a mission to show you who the FBI is and what the FBI does through my books, my blog, and my podcast case reviews with former colleagues. As of this month, I have been recording FBI Retired Case File Review for 9 years. I uploaded the very first episode in January of 2016. One of the highlights of my time producing and hosting this podcast was speaking one-on-one with FBI Director Christopher Wray. I'm reposting my interview with Director Wray to commend him for his many years of government service, 7 as the director of the FBI. I believe he personifies the FBI. His focus on the field, the men and women working throughout the country, shows his fidelity. By visiting each division at least 2, if not 3 times, he demonstrated to his employees that he saw them. He recognized their commitment to the mission and to the personal sacrifices they made to get the job done. His decision to sign off on investigations, searches, and arrests based on fact-based evidence, even though he knew it could lead to unfair claims of bias and possible dismissal from his position, highlight his bravery. His determined leadership in the face of criticism, especially from former and retired agents, confirmed his integrity. During Director Wray's recent all-employee town hall, where he announced he would step down, he told employees, "I'm honored and humbled to serve alongside you. And doing it all these years has been the greatest privilege of my life. For me, it's always been about the people, all of you, the partners we do the work with, and the American people, the ones we do the work for." Director Wray ended his remarks by saying, "Remember that you chose and earned this job. You chose and earned the privilege of serving your country. As we move into our next chapter, let's stay focused, heads up, eyes forward, and shoulder to shoulder." With nearly 350 episodes showcasing FBI successes, I think I've earned the right to share my thoughts about the future of the FBI, but I'll do that after the interview. Don't worry, I'm keeping my promise to you that this show will never be political or partisan, so please stick around to the very end. Before we get to the interview with Director Wray, I just want to say Happy New Year. I will send out my January email to Reader Team members on Monday, January 6, 2025. Got to get used to saying that year. Look out for it in your inbox, but if it's not there, you know what to do. Check your spam filter and promotions tab. I'm finally reviewing a movie for FBI Teachable Moments many of you have been asking me to cover. I want to welcome new listeners. In your podcast app's description of this episode, you'll find a link to join my reader team where I talk all about crime, fiction, and you can learn about the FBI and books, TV, and movies. There are also links for where you can buy me a cup of coffee, discover my books available as ebooks and paperbacks wherever books are sold, and audiobooks on Audible and Spotify. Thank you for your support. Here's the show after this short message from a sponsor. I want to welcome my guest, FBI Director Christopher Wray. Director Wray, thank you for accepting my invitation to the 300th episode of FBI Retired Case File Review.
Well, it's great to be here with you, Jerry. I think the last time I saw you, you were getting an award at the G-Man Honors dinner. So I'm really glad to be here with you on your milestone episode here.
Thank you. Actually, when we were sitting next to each other at dinner, I showed you how to pull up podcast on your phone. And I know you're a really busy person, but have you had a chance to start listening to podcasts yet?
I have a little bit. Yeah, I have. Not as much time as I would like, but the ones that I've listened to, I've enjoyed very much.
All right. Well, that's great. Great to hear. So usually what I do on the show is I have retired and former FBI employees, a couple of active, come on to share parts of their FBI story. But I also like to debunk myths and misconceptions about the FBI as they show up in books, TV, and movies. And so what I thought we would do today is to look at this conversation and that theme and have you go through some of the misconceptions that are out there with the general public and the news outlets, and in your own opinion, the misconceptions they currently have about the FBI. How does that sound?
That sounds just fine. Just
Uh,
fine.
Okay, great. And I have a list of questions. Usually I just have a kind of conversation and let the guest talk and kind of run the show. But I have a list of questions because I want to be wise about my time here with you. And so my first question is about FBI cliches. And I've always thought that the FBI is the world's premier law enforcement agency. But there are critics out there who think that's a cliche. And they're saying that the American people have lost faith in the FBI and that the FBI brand is not what it once was. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
Well, I got a lot of thoughts on that, as you might imagine. I guess I would start by saying that there are all sorts of opinions out there about us, just like there are about every other major institution these days. But the opinions that we're focused on, that I'm focused on, are those of the people we actually do the work with and the people we do the work for. And I can tell you what I see and hear there because I speak constantly with local chiefs and sheriffs from all 50 states who we work closely with every day, to judges coast to coast who see and hear our work up close all year long, to business leaders who turn to us for help with everything from cyber attacks to Chinese economic espionage, to victims and their families that we protect from gang violence and predators. I could go on. And the FBI, those people tell me about consistently, and I say consistently, I mean over and over and over again, almost resoundingly, is the same FBI that I get to see as director, an FBI that is respected, appreciated, trusted, and that's there for them when they need us most, and that they describe, and again, I mean over and over again, as better than ever. And better than ever, by the way, is a quote that I hear constantly. Those are exact words. That those are the folks that we're focused on, not on chasing favor with armchair quarterbacks on social media or political pundits. I look at things like how our recruiting is going. We have thousands of Americans applying in droves to devote their lives, their careers to working at the FBI. And I think sometimes, Jerry, people are surprised when I let them know this, but our recruiting has actually gone up dramatically since I started, hitting levels higher than in about a decade, at a time when law enforcement, as a lot of your listeners may know in general, and to a certain extent, even the military, has struggled with recruiting. And we're talking about young men and women, Americans in their 20s and 30s, many of them from the military or law enforcement, about 50% of them with advanced degrees, no less, in a strong job market. So these are folks who got a whole lot of other choices.
Well, why is that? Why do you think that even though we're hearing some, critics talk bad about the FBI, why is it that we have all of these young people still interested in joining?
Because I think young people in America see past the noise and the chatter and are attracted to our mission and are attracted to the quality and character of the people who work at the FBI. And I see that not just with those young men and women, but I see that with all those chiefs and sheriffs around the country who keep entrusting their outstanding officers to serve on our task forces, now up to more than 6,000 state, local, tribal law enforcement officers from something like 1,800 different departments and agencies, and they're sending their folks to be on our task forces, and it's sure as heck not because they don't have enough work to do in their home departments. And I think it's inspiring and frankly humbling to have their trust and their partnership. And so I think ultimately, when people talk about brand and reputation, I think the reason the FBI has been such a central and enduring part of American society for 115 years is precisely because we say focus not on the noise, but on the work and the people we do the work with and the people we do the work for.
Well, I agree with you, but we don't necessarily know who in the future we're going to be working with and working for. So I do still think it's important to respond to those critics. And I know that some people who aren't familiar with how the Bureau works and what we do, they're alleging that the FBI is politicized and that we target conservatives. So I think it's still important to address those critics, don't you think?
Sure, absolutely. And as you know, Jerry, a lot of these critics, I think, either overlook or don't know. The FBI is made up of 38,000 men and women who are dedicated career law enforcement professionals. Not a single one of them, from the field to the seventh floor of the Hoover building, are political appointees. You could look at our leadership team, the top 8 people in the Bureau. Far from DC bureaucrats, it's made up of career FBI folks with a combined, and I'm talking about the top 8 people here, combined 160 plus years of agent experience. They've been at the FBI for an average of 25 years. They've served in 21 different field offices, a whole host of places overseas, from Baghdad to Kabul to Guantanamo Bay. They've served in the Air Force, the Army, Marines. They're prior state and local law enforcement officers. And as for me, when I hear this criticism, I'm the Bureau's sole political appointee. I was nominated by President Trump, previously nominated for the leadership position at the Justice Department by President Bush, confirmed by overwhelming bipartisan support, near unanimously, both times, with not a single Republican senator voting against me either of those times. So it's utterly bewildering to me that I or the FBI would be accused of bias against conservatives or any political party. The FBI is and is going to stay independent, and that means protecting the American people without fear or favor, upholding the Constitution and the rule of law. It means following the facts wherever they lead, no matter who it makes happy or unhappy. And I add that last part because I think people tend to sometimes forget being independent does not mean that everybody's going to like the outcome of our work. I think all too often in today's world, people's standard for whether something was fair or objective or independent, and whether you're talking about an FBI investigation, a Supreme Court decision, or even an election, is whether they liked the result. In other words, whether their side won or lost. But as you know from your long career, and many of your listeners know, that's not how independence and objectivity works. We're not on either side. We're on the American people side, the Constitution side, and this tendency to attack the motives and legitimacy and integrity of institutions when you don't like the result is not healthy or productive. And I will just say, Jerry, that I have found that almost invariably the people screaming the loudest about the politicization of the FBI are themselves the most political, and more often than not making claims of politicization to advance their own views or goals, and they often don't know the facts or are choosing to ignore them. When the FBI opens investigations, as was true in your day, we deal in facts, and our focus is on violence and threats, including violations of federal law, regardless of ideology or the side of issue that someone falls on. Just take one example, although there are lots of them. You could take something like abortion-related violence. You might never know this from the media, but, while we have lots of ongoing investigations into abortion-related violence, in fact, since the leak of the Dobbs draft Supreme Court decision last year, more than 70% of our abortion-related cases involve violence or threats against pro-life victims. And I find people are often surprised to hear that, but those are the facts.
That is interesting.
Yeah. And I think ultimately, nobody gets to see the independence and objectivity of the FBI the way I do. Based on now 6 years in the job, I've visited all 56 field offices twice. I'm on my third round now. I've talked to chiefs and sheriffs from all 50 states, prosecutors, judges, victims. And what I see up close are people fiercely determined to do the right thing in the right way and to follow the facts wherever they lead, no matter who likes it or what connections they have. And I've been crystal clear with our workforce since I started that I expect nothing less. And in the rare instances when somebody strays from that, expectation or obligation, then we deal with it using the tools at our disposal. Just one last thing on this point, though, is that we, of course, only control our part. That is the FBI's work. An awful lot of the criticism these days is about who's getting charged or not charged and what they're getting charged with or not getting charged with. And those, as has been true for 115 years, those are decisions for prosecutors, not agents. And that's a distinction that too many people seem to forget these days.
Well, continuing, on the topic of the brand and how we are being perceived, at this point, I do want to go back to those critics, because as a podcaster and an author, I'm on social media and I'm reading the comments. So I know that these are challenging times for the FBI. And I'd like to know if you can talk about how these times are similar or different to what's happened in the past. I'm thinking Watergate, Waco, the FBI, CIA not connecting the dots, those type of challenging times in the FBI before. Do you think those experiences provide any type of guide or guidance on how to get through what the FBI is going through now?
I do think that you're correct, Jerry, that the FBI has had no shortage of challenges in the last 115 years. And in fact, you can go back, it's pretty striking, you can go back and look at quotes from any number of past directors over our 115-year history, and you will read those quotes or hear those quotes, and they will sound to you as if they were something I could have written this morning. I mean, you could look at Director Wray after the Oklahoma City bombing, talking about how amazed and saddened he was about wide coverage of federal law enforcement officers being described as thugs and voices claiming repression by government. You could look at Director Hoover in the early 70s bemoaning a climate of what he called turmoil and confrontation and unrest and disputed authority and rioting and vandalism, and projecting that it's going to continue for a long time. You could look at Director Webster talking about the AppScam public corruption investigation and all the controversy and negative press coverage the Bureau had to endure at that time, and how Congress was, in his words, just shocked at what the FBI had done there. One of the things that really struck me about Director Webster's quote is that he went on to say that by the time we, and by we he means the FBI, had finished with the AppScam trials, nobody questioned that we knew what we were doing. So I think we've been here before. I think what's different about today is the ubiquitous social media and 24/7 cable coverage. Those are things that didn't exist for some of those prior eras. And the way we get through it, though, is, as they say, we're going to keep the main thing the main thing. That means staying focused on the work and how we do it, and the people we do the work with and the people we do the work for.
I think, I'm hearing you, but I do want to just continue on this topic, because I don't know if in those challenging times before, and maybe I'm wrong, that we had gotten to a point where critics were calling for the FBI to be defunded. And that to me is absolutely frightening. And I'd love to know what you think the impact of the FBI's budget being reduced would have on the Bureau.
Well, first, I would say that even in this era, over the last several years, our budget has been growing quite encouragingly. But needless to say, these calls for defunding or even dramatically limiting our funding would at best be short-sighted and reckless, and at worst be catastrophic. And catastrophic not just for the men and women of the FBI, but for our partners and, most importantly, for the American people themselves. And that's because of the incredible impact our folks are making in communities every day. Take violent crime. We arrested 20,000 violent criminals last year. That's almost 60 per day, every day, and dismantled something like 370 violent gangs in finest FBI tradition last year alone. And when you talk with chiefs and sheriffs in all 50 states, they want to grow our partnerships on violent crime, not gut them. You could look at crimes against children. We arrested last year almost 3,000 child predators, saved 2,000 plus kids from abuse and exploitation. We need more money to go after predators and protect kids, not less. You could look at our work in counterintelligence against the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party alone. That's putting aside Russia, Iran, et cetera. The number of investigations the FBI has been conducting against the Chinese government has grown 1,300%. It's well over 2,000 active investigations as we speak. We need more money to protect our economic security, not less. You could look at cyber. We're investigating 100 different ransomware variants, each one of them with scores of victims. The Chinese alone have a bigger hacking program than every other major nation combined. So we need more money to protect American critical infrastructure, innovation, economic security from cyber threats, not less. Terrorism. A lot of this doesn't get covered as much in the press anymore, but over the past few years, the FBI has thwarted potential terrorist attacks, some by jihadist-inspired violent extremists, some by domestic violent extremists against targets like a July 4th parade, crowded beach on a holiday weekend, a hospital during COVID, multiple houses of worship. We need more money for that, not less. Fentanyl, opioids. It's routine now, Jerry, for a single FBI field office in a single seizure to seize enough fentanyl to wipe out the equivalent of an entire state. So we need more money for that, not less. On the same vein, organized crime, one of the FBI's sort of flagship longstanding programs, we're conducting over 300 investigations into cartel leadership. You're talking about sophisticated, deadly targets who are responsible for flooding this country with drugs and guns and people. And we need more money to fight back against the cartels exploiting our southwest border, not less. So, yes, defunding or limiting our funding would be disastrous for the 38,000 dedicated career law enforcement professionals in the FBI and their spouses and their kids, people who have sacrificed so much for the American public. But it also hurts our great state and local law enforcement partners who we work with daily and who are more dependent than ever on us in a whole slew of ways to battle, violent crime and the scourge of drugs. And most importantly, it hurts the American people, neighborhoods and communities all over America that we're protecting from violent gangs and cartels and child predators and foreign and domestic terrorists, Chinese spies, hackers, et cetera. So defunding, who does it help? It helps those same violent gangs and cartels, child predators, foreign and domestic terrorists, Chinese spies, hackers, et cetera. So there's no question that cutting critical funding to the FBI to combat those threats is going to make America less safe. And I'm optimistic that cooler heads will prevail.
Well, I hope so too. I definitely hope so too, because I have seen the FBI's mission grow. And as you know, I am out there promoting the FBI and very proud of what we're doing. But I do, and I keep going back to this, but I know that you've opened up cases where there have been threats against the FBI and against FBI employees. And when I read about those things and I read about what the critics have to say, I guess I should stop reading those comments. But when I read that stuff, I do think about the active employees. And so I want to know, how's the morale in the Bureau? What do you say to the FBI, active FBI employees in the wake of this almost constant attacks on the agency?
Well, look, our people are human, and nobody likes to see the organization they've dedicated their careers, really their lives to, unfairly criticized. But I will also tell you that the good news is that our people are tough and resilient. And if you talk to our folks, as I do when I'm out visiting field offices, and as I've said, I've been to all 56 twice, and I'm now going through all 56 a third time. And when I do that, I meet not just with management, but I meet privately or separately with, the GS-13s and the frontline supervisors and talk to them about what they're thinking and feeling. And one of the things that I come across is, just as I suspect was true when you went through Quantico, everybody's asked, what is your why? In effect, why have you dedicated your career and your life to this? And not a single one of them has as their why winning over talking heads on social media or getting praised by politicians.
Good point.
It's all because of the mission and the people they get to do the mission with. And in that vein, as I've said, what we hear over and over again is that we're doing better than ever. And that's why our recruiting is up so significantly and people want to work for the FBI in droves. But just to punctuate that last point a second, because I just had a graduation recently, every graduation, and I haven't missed a single graduation in 6 years, has something that I think is particularly special, which is when an FBI family member, that is a current FBI employee or maybe a retired FBI agent, has the privilege of presenting the badge and credentials to a graduating family member who's joining our ranks. And I'm up there on stage with them, and I get to see it up close, and I can see the pride that they both have. And if you want to know about morale, when current employees are encouraging their spouses and siblings to join them inside the FBI, that to me speaks volumes about how people feel about the place. I would add that the number of agents who, when they're approaching mandatory retirement at 57, are increasingly asking for extensions so they can continue doing a job they love. And it certainly isn't because of the pay in this economy. So, this too is a place where a lot of the narrative in the outside, I think, is very overstated.
I also have an indication of the fact that might be overstated, and that's the number of TV shows and movies about the FBI. I do like a monthly review for FBI policy and procedural accuracy, and I'm never, at a loss for a TV show or a movie to review.
Yeah, I think there's a level of fascination and enthusiasm for the FBI that I encounter all over the country. I take great pride and inspiration from the little kids that I encounter who want to join our ranks. And I come across that all the time. And most of the time, it's because those little kids encountered a current or retired FBI agent who inspired them. And they were so impressed that they thought, man, I want to be like them. I want to go work there.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I do, when and why you joined the FBI question at the end of every episode. And so many of the people that I interview, so many of the retired agents, said that they wanted to be an FBI agent since they were little because of having met an agent or some TV show or movie that they watched. But I still have a list of questions that I know my listeners are going to want me to have you respond to. So I'm going to ask you about employees who are not happy with the FBI, active employees who have concerns or complaints about FBI investigations, policies, and procedures, the whistleblowers. Could you kind of address that?
Sure. I recognize the important role that whistleblowers play, and I take very seriously our responsibility under the relevant rules and other protections for whistleblowers, which are something that we train all of our folks on. I will say, and this is important too, that I likewise take very seriously all of our other rules and policies and security requirements, and we expect all of our employees to comply with both. And despite what some have claimed, the FBI has not and is not going to retaliate against individuals who make protected whistleblower disclosures.
All right. One last thing before we get into some futuristic questions that I have. And that has to do with my core guest list of retired agents. I know some of them, because I'm on different forums that are just for FBI, retired and former FBI employees. I know some of them are having a hard time adjusting to the changes that have been made to the FBI's mission since 9/11. And some have been critical of FBI leadership, all of the directors since 2001, who they feel are straying too far from the Bureau's law enforcement mission. So what do you say to them so that they can accept, that the mission has changed?
I'd start with saying that I have enormous appreciation for our retired agents. And in fact, many of them, both the agents I worked with out in the field before they retired and the agents I worked with at headquarters in DC, and some of them I think have been guests on your podcast over the years, are people that I consider friends, and their input matters a lot to me. And it's one of the things that's very special about the FBI is that our retired agents, long after they've retired, care so deeply about the organization. But of course, 9/11 changed the way we do business. And I say that as somebody who spent 9/11 in FBI headquarters in a packed SIOC. I know you know what SIOC is, but some of your listeners may not know that it's essentially a picture of what you would imagine the FBI at headquarters would have as its state-of-the-art operations center. But I spent most of that day and night and many of the days that followed in that very space when the attack occurred. And in the years that followed, I spent meaningful time with the families of the 3,000 victims killed on that day. And I think we owe it to those families to do everything in our power to prevent something like that from ever happening again. I should add that it's not just something that happened to us 22 years ago. It's still happening to us, not just because the memories of those victims live on, but because more people now have died of 9/11 related illnesses than were lost on September 11th of 2001. And sadly, that matches our FBI experience. We lost, of course, 2 members of our FBI family on 9/11 itself. But since that day, we've lost more than 20 to 9/11 related illnesses, including 3 who passed away from 9/11 related cancers just this year. And I've had the honor of attending their funerals, meeting with their families, talking with a number of them in their final days, either in the hospital or at home. And those are interactions I will never forget. And so in the aftermath of 9/11, to honor the sacrifice that all those people have made, a whole bunch of independent reviews found that the FBI and the intelligence community needed to transform to better protect the American people. And we developed new capabilities to combat the terrorist threat, changed our focus from investigating terrorist plots and attacks after the fact to trying to stop them before they occur, and forging all kinds of deeper partnerships with law enforcement, intelligence community, foreign counterparts. And to me, that's just the FBI evolving to meet a new threat, as it's done over and over again over 115 years, if you look at the FBI's history. And some of the things that people feel are new are really not. We've always collected intelligence in support of our investigations. We've had a serious role in counterterrorism and counterintelligence going really all the way back to the FBI's creation. I mean, you could look at our role as the lead counterterrorism agency in the U.S. goes back decades, over 40 years at least, to the first JTTF in New York, the Pan Am 103 bombing. You could go through all the terrorist attacks that we've handled over the years, all before 9/11. Our role in the intelligence community as an integral part of the U.S. government's intelligence mission goes back to before there even was an intelligence community. And what has changed on that front over the last 20 years, I think, is the recognition both by the FBI and by leading law enforcement agencies, the top police departments, for example, throughout the U.S., of integrating intelligence into operations and using intelligence to be more effective in everything we do. And then even our national security responsibilities for counterintelligence and counterespionage, those go all the way back to World War I. And the FBI has done phenomenal work in that space over the decades, from our work against the Nazis in World War II to our work against Soviet spies during the Cold War to the great work that our folks are doing now to counter the Chinese Communist Party. So I think it's less drastic and less of a deviation from our identity and our history than I think sometimes people remember. But having said all of that, the last thing I would leave you with on this particular concern is that even with everything I just said, what I think most people don't know, certainly given what the media chooses to cover, is that today's FBI still devotes more resources, that's more agents all across the country, to the FBI's traditional criminal programs than it does to any of our national security work.
Yeah, see, I'm glad you said that, because I'm one of the people who would think that maybe it's 60-40 or even higher that you are, straying away from our traditional law enforcement responsibilities. So
And I think a lot of people feel that way. They have that perception, but I think it's because the media, we're lucky if the media covers it 60-40. It's probably more like 70-30 the way the media covers our work in the national security space versus all of the incredible work, which is massive and greater than in number what we're doing on the national security side on violent crime, organized crime, child exploitation, white collar crime, all those traditional criminal programs.
Well, that's great to hear because I was a white collar crime agent. I worked economic crime my entire career. So it makes me feel good and very happy that we're still in the game in that area. Now, you talked about recruitment being up. So it doesn't sound like the challenges that the FBI is facing today are hurting hiring. But this is another concern I've heard from retired agents. They're wondering who we're hiring today and concerned that standards or qualifications aren't being met. Of course, I think every generation of agents says that.
So, Jerry, one of the things that I tell a lot of our former agents in particular is that if they have any apprehension or concerns about the direction of the FBI or the state of the FBI, that all they need to do is come attend an agent graduation in Quantico. And I haven't missed a single one in 6 years. And the quality and character of the people joining today's FBI would be enough to inspire anybody. In fact, I would challenge anyone to attend a graduation and not come away feeling awfully optimistic and encouraged about the future. I look at the fact that our recruiting has gone up dramatically at a time when law enforcement recruiting has actually suffered almost everywhere else. I look at the fact that we're continuing, even with these greater numbers, to attract people with military and law enforcement experience, at the same kind of rate we always have, people with advanced degrees. It's something like 50% of every agent class. And these are people who have a whole lot of other opportunities in today's job market. And as was true in your day, they're sure as heck not coming to the FBI because the pay is better. But the thing that they all have in common, despite coming from different walks of life, is this zeal and passion, this drive to put service over self. And that's true from the bottom of the organization to the top. And I could give you so many examples, but when I think about the kind of folks who are in today's FBI, joining the FBI these days, I think about folks like the Charlotte agent who used sheer physical force to rescue a female passenger from a fiery car crash and extinguish her burning clothes and render first aid, or the Atlanta agent who unexpectedly came across a violent gang fugitive, attempted the arrest, chased the subject into his vehicle, got stuck in the door as the subject tried to drive off, got dragged across an interstate while being rammed into cars, and yet still managed to fire his weapon, stop the car, call 911, and apprehend the subject despite a broken arm, leg, and pelvis. Or the Chicago agent who, in looking for a fugitive in a farmhouse in rural Illinois, was shot badly in his dominant hand, and not only survived, but retrained himself to shoot left-handed, requalified for SWAT left-handed, and mentor other injured agents both at the FBI and elsewhere. Or the Portland agent who, off for a morning run, comes across a mentally ill woman down in the train tracks and climbs down in the train tracks. And while she's scrambling around and trying to bite him and everything else, and basically manages to wrestle, in effect, the woman out of the way of an oncoming train. Or the Portland special agent bomb tech who was injured with shrapnel in his leg from a booby trap while searching a subject's residence, on a Friday, and he's right back at work on Monday. That is today's FBI, and that is the FBI that we're building for the future. And it gives me great hope, and I think it should give all your listeners great hope.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I've spoken to some of those people that are joining the FBI because they reach out to me and thanking me for the podcast, because if they had questions or concerns listening to agents talk about how it really is to investigate a case, those concerns disappear. And so I know who's coming into the FBI, and I definitely know who is already there. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Jerry.
I want to use my time that I have left judiciously. So I want to ask you two more questions. And one is about your time as a director. You've been serving now for about 6 years, which means you have about 4 more to go. Fingers crossed. But what do you say are some of the high points of your tenure? And what do you hope to accomplish for the remainder of your term?
Well, there's so many high points really over the past 6 years. I mean, certainly every graduation is a high point for me. Every field office visit and hearing from people out on the front lines about their work are high points for me. I think, to me, the things that move me the most are seeing up close the impact that our folks have, where we're changing people's lives forever. Just to give a quick example that I think gives you a flavor of it, I think about, a 4-year investigation that we had in one of our field offices in the Midwest, where I think it was Cleveland, where, a mom reached out to the office because her little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, wanted her mom to call the FBI field office and say thank you, because for months that little girl had been so afraid of all the gang violence in her neighborhood that she was afraid to sleep on top of her bed, so she slept under her bed. And in vintage FBI fashion with our partners, we did one of those big operations and sweeps with dozens of arrests, seizures of guns and drugs and so forth, and really just completely changed that neighborhood. And the little girl, for the first time in as long as she could remember, was now felt safe enough to sleep in her bed and not under it. That stuff, that's the why. That's why people do the work. And I see examples like that every day in this job. And it's part of why it's 6 years of a whole lot of high points, I guess is what I would say. As far as what I hope to accomplish, in the years that I have left, there's so many things, it's hard to narrow it down. I want to make sure that we solidify our position as the world's premier cyber investigative agency. I want to double down on our work to combat China's relentless efforts to steal our country's innovation. I want to make sure that we're continuing to innovate in what I consider the best FBI tradition to be ahead of tomorrow's threats. But it's a long list that probably exceeds the time that we have here today, Jerry.
Well, I do want to just say before I ask you my last and standard question or comment, is that it's a real highlight for us to hear you talk about those partnerships, those law enforcement partnerships, because I know we started off talking about myths and misconceptions. One of the cliches is, of course, that the FBI doesn't play well with others, and you've definitely debunked that.
Yeah, that is a stereotype that I find, or a caricature really, that I find totally inconsistent with my experience and what I hear from chiefs and sheriffs about the FBI really every week.
All right. So here is, well, let me just end here with saying that having you on FBI Retired Case File Review has been a highlight of my post FBI career as a podcaster and author and content creator, as they say. I like to give my guest the last word. So what would you like to say?
Well, I'm honored to be the guest for your 300th podcast, and I want to congratulate you on this achievement and thank you for everything you do in your post-retirement career to dispel the myths and misconceptions about the FBI and to spread the word about all of our great work. I guess maybe one way to just wrap up the conversation is to say here what I say at every agent graduation since I've started as director. And as I think I said, I've never missed an agent graduation in 6 years. And so what I say to all of them is that the FBI has been extraordinary for a long time. And there's a legacy that comes with that, a legacy of respect and responsibility. And I tell them when they leave Quantico and tell people that they're a special agent of the FBI, that they will find that they have people's respect. And there's a reason for that, which is that for 115 years, the FBI has stood for the very best of America, stopped terrorists and spies and hackers and put countless criminals behind bars. But the FBI's legacy isn't built only on results, on our wins, although I'll stack our wins up against anybody's on what we've done over the years. Our legacy is built on the way we've done it. So to me, being part of this organization carries with it a solemn responsibility to do our jobs well, of course, absolutely, but more importantly, to do our jobs with honesty and integrity. And so what I tell the graduating agents each time is that the FBI's mission is simple to say, but pretty profound to execute day in, day out, which is protect the American people and uphold the Constitution. And we're to carry it out. We're going to abide by the rule of law and adhere to our core values. We're going to follow the facts wherever they lead, no matter who likes it. And trust me, there's always somebody who doesn't like it. And we're going to pursue justice in every investigation. Those are our guiding principles. Those are our anchors, and we've got to adhere to them no matter the test. And my job is to ensure that nothing distracts us from that mission, which is a commitment that we're all making together to the American people.
And that's the end of the interview. In your podcast app's description of this episode, you'll find a link to the show notes at jerrywilliams.com, where you'll find photos of FBI Director Christopher Wray, a list of the questions I asked him, a link to the video from Director Wray's all-employee town hall where he announced he would step down. I also included a few photos of Director Wray and of me and the other FBI directors I served under. I've also added one with Attorney General Janet Reno because, well, I just wanted to show it off. There's also a link to an episode I did with legendary FBI leader Oliver Buck Revelle about the important but precarious role of the FBI when investigating criminal matters with serious political implications. Such as having to resign from a position 3 years before your appointed time is up. Now, I know I may lose a few followers because of what I'm going to say. Who knows? I may even gain a few. But guess what? I don't care. I'm here for one reason: to support the FBI. I consider what I do here a public service, a mission to show the public who the FBI is and what the FBI does by sharing the fascinating case reviews presented by my former colleagues. I absolutely love what I do. When I attended new agents training at the FBI Academy over 40-some years ago, I did very well, but the class counselor still added a comment to the graduation report sent to my first office. It said that I needed to learn and respect the chain of command because I spoke up several times during training when I experienced what I perceived as disparate treatment. And I continue to speak up during my entire FBI career, and I occasionally paid the price for my frankness. But I've been mostly quiet here because I want everyone to listen to the case reviews and to learn who we really are, even those who might have problems with the FBI. So hear me out today. As someone who worked for 12 years in media relations and public relations, 5 for the FBI, I recognize that the FBI has a serious public perception problem, and there's lots of work that needs to be done to fix what is broken and address negative perceptions. Fixing the stuff is beyond my pay grade, but I can work on perception with this podcast, sharing real, true stories about what the FBI does. But I'm having a difficult time understanding how others who know what we do can claim that the FBI is corrupt, failing, a threat to democracy, or in need of a major cultural change. The FBI is those brave and dedicated men and women working cases in the field that Director Wray addressed during his last all-employee town hall meeting. Every time someone denigrates the organization they work for, those nearsighted critics are also denigrating those FBI employees and what they do to keep America safe. Don't tell me that the critics aren't referring to the agents and support staff, because they are the ones who are stigmatized and affected the most, especially by the reckless rhetoric of their former colleagues. Every time I see one of them being interviewed on TV, YouTube, or a podcast, and their host starts talking shit about the FBI while exploiting those former employees' words and their status as an FBI agent, I'm reminded of two old sayings. Be careful what you ask for, and don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Remember what Director Wray said about the very people complaining about politicization being themselves political? Do I need to play that audio again? I know the FBI is not perfect. Remember, I joined in 1982, only 10 years after Director Hoover, may he rest in peace. All of the veteran agents and members of upper management had worked under Hoover and still followed his strict critical parent philosophy. I've been through some things, but here's my advice. If you have a problem with FBI leaders who no longer even work for the Bureau, or programs, policies, and procedures you believe are broken, refer to them by their name. Don't dump your discontent all over the FBI brand. Since Director Wray announced his resignation, I've heard from many agents, retired and active, as well as from listeners who are concerned about the future of the FBI. They recognize the importance of the FBI director position, and they have shared with me the qualifications they hope the next director will possess and exhibit. I invited former FBI retired Case File Review podcast guest, retired agent Jerome Lorrain from episodes 262 and 313 here to share his list with us. Hi, Jerome.
Hi, Jerry. It's great to be back with you.
The first question I'm going to ask you before you read your list of qualifications is why? Why did you reach out to me? I know you've also reached out to other FBI related organizations and associations. Why do you want to talk to us, the public and active and retired agents about the director position?
Well, in short answer would be our service to our country does not end on the day that we retire from the FBI. The long answer would be that I absolutely loved every day I worked at the FBI. And I've been retired about 3 years now, and scarcely a day goes by that I don't miss it in some form or fashion. I know how critically important the FBI is to America, to the safety of Americans, to the future of our country, to upholding the rule of law and upholding the Constitution. And I would argue, other than the president or the attorney general, there is no more important critical position in the executive branch of the United States government than that of the FBI director. So I just felt it was necessary that somebody speak up and kind of relay that to the public of how serious and important this position is. Enough consideration should go into who the next director should be. A lot of people believe, I believe wrongly, that the FBI has become biased or prejudiced or weaponized, and I don't believe that's the case. So I wanted to speak out and give my 2 cents, having worked in the FBI. And having said all that, I have a tremendous amount of hope and faith in the future. I know, as you do, Jerry, the quality and the character of the men and women that serve in the FBI. And I'm very confident the FBI is going to be on steady ground going forward, and that the 38,000 men and women who serve daily are going to do the right thing every day and follow the law and follow the Constitution.
All right, one last thing before we get to your list. Some will say, after hearing it, that, well, not all of the people that have served as director for the FBI have met these qualifications. So are you saying the person needs to have all of them?
No, absolutely not. I just off the top of my head wrote down, okay, if I was in charge of nominating someone to be the director, what would be some of the things I'd be looking for as far as experience, reputation, loyalty, ability, character, trust. And we got to think about the future too. We're setting the standards of who's going to lead the FBI, 100 years from now.
All right, so let's hear the list.
Number one, possess an unquestionable loyalty to uphold the Constitution of the United States and protect the American people from all threats, both foreign and domestic. Number two, possess an established record of expertise in either law enforcement or intelligence matters, possibly both, that'd be great, and also be widely recognized as one of America's foremost leaders in these fields. Number three, have a history of nonpartisan service to the United States and be someone who is respected by both political parties for being unbiased, honest, and a defender of the Constitution, our criminal justice system, and the rule of law. Number four, possess the ability to manage public corruption investigations at all levels of government, local, state, and national, in a fair and unbiased manner, irrespective of the political party of the person involved. Number five, have managerial experience successfully leading an organization as large as the FBI, which has 38,000 employees and a budget of $11 billion. Number six, have prior experience in high-level governmental management, such as a cabinet-level position, CIA Director, Attorney General, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Homeland Security, Director of National Intelligence, or Secretary of State would be similar cabinet-level positions. Number seven, have excelled as a senior law enforcement leader, a chief of police, a sheriff, a state police commander, a DEA administrator, or other leader, manager of a federal law enforcement agency. Number eight, have honorably served as a general officer rank in the U.S. military. That would be general or above in rank. Number nine, have honorably served as a U.S. senator, a U.S. representative, a governor, a state attorney general, or a comparable high-level managerial position. And number 10, have a record which demonstrates the ability to respect our election process and the results therein, and who is capable of honoring the will of the American people by serving as director under multiple presidencies, irrespective of whether the president is a duly elected Democrat or Republican, and irrespective of whether the Attorney General is a Democrat or Republican.
Now, I will list your FBI Director qualifications on my website, jerrywilliams.com, in the show notes for this episode 342.
Thank you. I think a lot of people may not understand how varied the FBI's mission is. Public corruption is one of the top priorities, and to be able to navigate that very difficult arena of investigating members of both political parties is not an easy thing to do. And that's why I think it's absolutely critical that we have somebody that's viewed by both parties as being fair, nonpartisan, ethical, and someone with a reputation of doing the right thing every time and follow the rule of law, regardless of the political party of the person that's involved.
Well, thank you for saying that. And I did another episode that is related to this, episode 270. I spoke to FBI legend Oliver Buck Revell. I'm sure you know of him.
Yes.
And he talked about the FBI and politics while doing a case review about a investigation that he oversaw that had ramifications for the FBI when it comes to working these type of cases. And quoting from his episode, he said, "If you think you're going to come through these types of investigations unscathed, that's not very realistic." So I know the FBI has been where they are today many times before. I am very hopeful we're going to come out okay.
I am as well. We both know the character of the employees that work in the FBI, and they're going to stand fast. They're going to take courage. They're going to follow the rule of law, the Constitution, and America is in good hands. And I know that from past experience. And I believe the FBI is still respected by the majority of Americans. You know, it hurts me that we have anybody that doesn't have confidence in our chief law enforcement agency. You're never going to get 100%, but, you know, I frequently say the only thing worse than having a corrupt law enforcement agency or judicial system is having a competent, fair law enforcement agency and judicial system and having people believe that that's not so. Americans can take comfort in knowing that the FBI has very high standards, and we're one of the most scrutinized agencies in the world, from inspector generals to Office of Professional Responsibility to civil and criminal codes. You know, there's media, there's Whistleblower Protection Act, the Freedom of Information Act. There's many, many levels of guide rails to keep partisan or keep corrupt or ineffective people from violating the trust.
The last thing that I want you to comment on, since you're a somewhat recent retiree, I retired many, many years ago. And during my career, I've had those opportunities to meet a director of the FBI when they came through to the field office. And I'm actually going to put photos from my opportunities to shake the hand of those directors when they came through in the show notes for this episode on my website, jerrywilliams.com. I have photos with everyone except for William Webster, who was the director when I came in. What if there is a director that was someone you have concerns about? What happens to the people in the field?
Well, they go about their daily job doing the work that they're required to do. So the biggest effect it would have would be on morale overall, because everybody wants a dynamic leader that's respected worldwide.
Thank you, Jerome, for sharing your list, your wish list, and thoughts about the next director of the FBI. I think the main point we were both hoping to make is that we support the men and women of the FBI and the FBI mission. I hope you enjoyed the interview and that you'll share it with your friends, family, and associates. You can show me just how much you liked it by buying me a coffee. There's a link in your podcast app's description of this episode, or you can visit jerrywilliams.com and tap on the little coffee cup icon in the bottom right-hand corner of my website. Don't forget to follow FBI Retired Case File Review on your favorite podcast app. Now, this podcast is all about true crime, but if you're also interested in crime fiction, once a month via my reader team email, I keep you up to date on the FBI and books, TV, and movies. When you join my reader team, you get access to my FBI reading resource, a colorful list of more than 70 books about the FBI written by FBI agents who have been guests on this podcast. There's nonfiction, crime fiction, true crime, and memoirs. You'll also get my FBI reality checklist, where I debunk 20 cliches about the FBI and receive news about what I'm up to and about my FBI nonfiction and crime fiction books. I want to thank you for listening to the very end. I hope you come back for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.